What is up? My name is Melissa Makak from Room 51, and this is Teach the Teach 101 on the Dice Tower, where I teach you general tips and tricks on how to teach board games. And in this video, I'll be covering getting players to play as quickly as possible. That's sort of my method of teaching games. I'm always trying to figure out how can I teach this game in a way that is allowing players to get right into the game as quickly as possible, which usually means cutting out some rules in the beginning and leaving some stuff for later. So that's really what I want to get into. Like, how do I figure out what rules I could sort of skim over for now and what rules I could explain a little bit later. I know some players don't like that very much and they want to know everything beforehand, and I'll save that for another video. But for this video, I'm going to get into exactly what it is I think about when I'm playing a game and how I'm going to teach it. One of the things being what rules are absolutely necessary in order to actually play the game, right? What rules are essential that I absolutely have to tell the players in order for them to start playing the game at all? So how do I figure that out? Usually I'm thinking about what instances of rules come into play later on in the game, and I don't need to necessarily tell them about it just yet. For example, combat in a lot of games doesn't tend to happen right off the bat. So I'll usually say something along the lines of like combat being part of the game. So I'm just thinking in terms of like maybe Twilight Imperium, 4th edition or whatever edition. I don't necessarily tell players exactly how combat works until it seems that, okay, combat is about to happen. But the way I do this is I say, okay, yes, combat is part of this game, and certain things will allow, I show them what things will allow them to get better at combat as time progresses, like what improves their chances of hitting, what produces more damage, things like that, just briefly. And then when combat is about to happen, or usually what'll happen too is if a player is really starting to think about going into combat, they'll just sort of ask like, okay, so how does combat actually work? So that's when I go into the nitty-gritty details of how combat works when it's about to happen, or maybe it's a turn or two before it's going to happen. That way we could get into things and they could start building up, or whatever it is, whatever game it is, right? Twilight Imperium was just an example, but this could be any game that has combat or whatever it is in it. Combat was just an example. The next thing I think about is how much of the rule do I need to explain? So some rules that I have to explain off the bat, sure, I might have to go into detail on how that works. Other rules, maybe they have to know just so that they understand the grasp of the game, but they might not necessarily need to know everything about that rule. So again, going back to our combat example, I could tell them a little bit, a snippet of how combat kind of works and what sort of things you want to pay attention to, but I won't go into detail of how it actually works. Sometimes you might even just want to direct players to player aids, right? So there's some things that you don't have to tell them all about. I'm thinking in terms of like maybe 7 Wonders, where there's tons of different yellow cards that have all kinds of iconography and everything. I usually just direct them to the player aid, right? I'm like, you know what? I don't have to explain what every single, icon means, but here's the player aid. Check it out, right? So, people are allowed to read things on their own a little bit as the game progresses. It also gives them something to do as they're waiting for their turn to come around. And now this method of teaching is actually kind of exhausting for the teacher, because now you're not only paying attention to what you're doing, you're paying attention to what everybody else is doing to see, okay, what phase of the game are we in? What is this player about to do? And all that sort of stuff, which is probably why I lose a lot of games. But that's okay. Yeah, it's really about like just really paying attention to what is going on in the game. That way you know, okay, I have to say what this rule is now. All right, let me introduce this now. Sometimes players get annoyed by like, oh, I didn't know, blah, blah, blah. It's the first game, and again, I'm going to save that for another video on how to deal with that type of player. But either way, thank you so much for watching. That's it for this episode. Let me know some of the tips and tricks you have in terms of getting players playing as quickly as possible. Also, let me know if you have any questions down below in the comments. I will catch you next time.